following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
Thank you, Telly Olson. We are back. Bock score from Nedick's at the Old Garden on 50th Street. And I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We are blessed to have Hal and David Hubler in studio. We're awaiting a few other folks. And I want to ask Hal the weekly question. What's up? What's the Bock score? What's the score with you?
Well, the score this week, Ralph, is about the Las Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the Las Vegas Golden Knights didn't exist until September. They're an expansion team in the National Hockey League. And as you know, and David knows, expansion teams serve two purposes. One is they're a cash cow for the existing teams because they have to pay an exorbitant fee to get into the league. And the second role is they're whipping boys. They're terrible teams because they get scraps and leftovers for their roster.
In all sports.
Yes, in all sports, absolutely.
And there's one other point. They draw extremely well because they're a novelty in whatever city they're in. So at least for the first couple of years, no matter how bad they are, people are going to turn out.
That's true. Well, the two examples that I cited in this week's column are the New York Mets lost 120 games in their first year, and Casey Stengel said, "Can't anybody here play this game?"
Right.
The Tampa Bay...
I think it was Jimmy Breslin who picked up on it and wrote a book.
Yeah, he wrote a book.
Yeah.
The Tampa Bay Bucks in football, National Football League, lost their first 26 games. That's pretty hard to do. But they did.
Coach from USC, if I remember correctly.
Yes, John McKay was the coach. John McKay said, we didn't block very well today, but we made up for it by not tackling. He had a very good sense of humor as well. But the Las Vegas Golden Knights have turned it all around. They're in first place at the All-Star break. They won 32 games, second most in the league at the All-Star break, and I find that remarkable. And you have to give them a lot of credit. They're, I think, 8 or 9 points in front in their division, and they're just changing the whole pattern of expansion teams in sports. So that was the subject this week, and I'm happy to talk about it or have David and you talk about it with me.
Well, I'd like to ask you, what do you think? Why did this happen? How come they were good right off the bat, or at least for the time being?
They picked the right guys. They picked the right players who were available to them. They had a choice of one. They had to pick one player from each of the 30 other franchises, and they picked the right players. Now, I can't tell you that any of them were Gordie Howe or Bobby Hull, but these were grinders, guys who worked at their craft. They have a goalie named Marc-Andre Fleury, who they picked up from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and he was a top-flight goalie. So you start. It's like a pitcher. The game starts with a pitcher. You have to have a good pitcher in order to win a game. Well, you have to have a good goalie in order to win a hockey game.
Yeah,
because he's going to keep the puck out of your net. And Fleury is an example of that. He is an excellent goaltender. Now, he's been hurt a lot of times in the early going this season, but they've been able to get through. They've had backup goalies in 3 or 4 games, and they've won those games, and they've had winning streaks of 5 and 8 games. They won their first 3 games. No expansion team in hockey has ever won its first 3 games. The Las Vegas Golden Knights did. And by the way, don't call them the Las Vegas Golden Knights. You have to call them the Vegas Golden Knights, because I learned that citizens of Las Vegas do not use the LAS prefix. They only use Vegas. So from now on, it's the Vegas Golden Knights. It's okay with
That's
me.
their official name?
So interesting to me, living in the Bay Area. San Franciscoites hate it when they use the expression Frisco.
Right. I knew that. Yeah.
And it was just the opposite as of the Vegas thing. That's very interesting to me.
Hey, Hal,
Well, I have nothing but good facts for you guys.
Yes, you do.
did the rest of the? I'm curious because you said they were able to pick one player from each team, but did the teams were they able to protect their best players?
Yeah, I'm sure they were. I don't know the details of the expansion draft, but I'm sure they were. So they left players available who were not, terrible players. If you protect, let's say, 12 on your roster, and your roster is 20, well, the 13th player is going to go, and he may not be such a terrible player.
Right.
So they came up with a roster of players. I don't know these guys. I don't follow hockey that closely, but these are, from what I can understand, they're grinders. They work at the craft, and they've produced a terrific record in the first half of the season.
Yeah, well, based on your formula of say protecting 12, that would probably put the picks into the third line of the team, and
yes.
and that's where your grinders are. These are the guys that want to move up to the second and the first line. So it makes a lot of sense that they would get some really good players from that.
They had to have done some really good scouting.
Yeah.
To know who's who and what's what in terms of their selections. But I just think it's remarkable that a team who comes into the league out of nowhere and is in first place by 10 points. I mean, that's remarkable. And it's
that's the only other
expansion
team in any sport that I've heard of that succeeded that quickly. The Angels were terrific. Within 2 years, they were, if not contenders, they threw a little scare into the Yankees in '62, their second year. And as you said, Hal, the Mets were absolutely atrocious. So I want to ask you if you remember what the changes were in baseball from the American League expansion, and excuse me if we've talked about this before, but the Angels were able to pick from better players, and I think, if I remember correctly, the National League made some changes in the draft. Do you remember?
I think you're right. I don't know the details of that, but I believe you're right about that. And what I remember is that players were assigned dollar values. So, for example, if you wanted to pick a player who was a $175,000 player, you could not pick another one who was valued at that price. And they put a value of on each player. I think the Mets wound up with a lot of $1.98 players.
And that was sad because a lot of them had been stars, and that's what I think the drafting was determined by the fans who had already, of course, lost the Dodgers and the Giants, but in picking, it was sort of a down memory lane sort of pick. We'll pick this guy and because he
a lot of it.
Well.
That was a lot of it, David.
Yeah.
They picked a lot of guys who had been stars with the Giants and with the Dodgers.
That's
and
right.
It was like, remember him?
Dodgers.
Oh, I remember him. Let's go watch him play.
Yeah, exactly.
They couldn't play anymore. They were done.
And
there comes a time.
When they saw that, and maybe even before they saw that, they used Casey as someone as a diversion.
Absolutely.
Oh, sure.
Take people's minds off of it and make it the lovable losers and all that. I didn't dig it. We were New Yorkers. We are a tradition of being in the World Series every year. I was very much against their losing and the way they made a joke out of it. Not so much the first year, but by the second year, they were almost as bad, and they had made some bad trades. They traded Bob Miller, one of their best pitchers, really, in a guy went on to a good career in the National League with the Dodgers. They traded him for Larry Burright and some other.
It's interesting. It's interesting. The Mets were awful for their first 7 years. I mean, they were awful. And in their 8th year, 1969, they won the World Series. Now, along came an expansion team called the New York Islanders, and they were awful. In fact, I remember Bill Torrey, who was the general manager of the Islanders, once telling me, why do they always write hapless? Why do they always call us hapless? And I said, Bill, because you're hapless. That's why. Get better and you won't have that problem. And son of a gun, they were born in 1972, and 8 years later, they won the Stanley Cup. And not only did they win the Stanley Cup in 1980, they won it in 1981, they won it in 1982, and they won it in 1983. 4 straight Stanley Cups.
Which is unheard of. I don't even think...
it's not unheard of. The Canadians were that kind of team.
Yeah, in a 6-team league.
Do you have any idea how aggravating that was to the New York Rangers?
Yes.
Who, to this day, what year are we in, 2018? Since 1940, the New York Rangers have won one Stanley Cup. That was in,
and it took until 1995 to do it.
Right. That's right. So here is an expansion team made up of scraps and leftovers. They were really awful, and they won 4 Stanley Cups in a row.
Well, look at the Pittsburgh Penguins were an expansion team, and how many Stanley Cups have they won? They won a couple. The Rangers are still looking for their second. And, of course,
I just flashed
the Capitals.
Unexpected stuff, the Miracle on Ice. Where were you guys?
Oh, you mean the Olympics?
I was in the press box.
Oh, wow.
I was in the press box. It was one of the greatest moments of my career.
As we were as fans.
I was at home watching it.
I will tell you this. A week before the Olympics, the U.S. Olympic hockey team played an exhibition against the Russian team in Madison Square Garden. And I said, well, that's an opportunity to take a look at what this team is like. I mean, it's all college players and minor league players. Let's see what they've got. And they got blown out of the building. I think they lost 11-2 or something like that. And I thought, well, this is going to be terrible when they get to the Olympics. I mean, this is not going to be funny. But I mean, they staged one of the great stories in sports history.
Absolutely.
By winning that gold medal. And you know what's interesting? We have the same situation now in South Korea when we have the Olympics, which start in a couple of weeks. The National Hockey League decided not to send players this year, and so the team is made up like the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. This hockey team is made up of minor leaguers, college players, amateurs, and so forth. Now, they don't stand a chance, or do they? Maybe they do.
Who knows?
I don't know. Let's see, That's why we play the games.
The interesting thing I find about that Miracle on Ice is that most people have either forgotten or never realized that the game against the Soviets was the semifinal round. They still had to go out. They still had to go out and beat the Canadians in the final game, which they did too.
Well, it was Finland. Wasn't it Finland the last game?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it was. Yes.
I think it was Finland. Yeah.
But of course those countries, those northern countries, they are quite reputable when it comes to playing ice hockey. It wasn't. Yeah, I mean, so they and how many teams have had a letdown after a big win against a major opponent?
They would, but this team was in another zone, believe me.
Yeah,
and that night, after they won that game, the game against the Soviets, I think, was 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday. And that night, I've never seen a town like Lake Placid, New York was that night. I mean, people were dancing in the streets. It was like I remember the end of World War II. That's how old I am. And I remember walking through the streets and people partying and laughing and just so happy that the war was over. Well, it was a similar thing that night in Lake Placid. People could not they were hugging one another. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to be part of it.
Yeah, you were very lucky. Yeah.
What was the locker room like? Was it as joyous as one would expect, or was it somewhat, like they were in shock themselves, I would imagine?
I never got into the locker room. What they did was they had a press conference across the street in a high school auditorium, and they brought the players into the auditorium, and they were giddy. That's the word I would use. They were laughing and just, I don't think they could believe what had happened, given what had happened 2 weeks earlier in Madison Square Garden,
What was the coach like? Anything that
Herb Brooks.
we don't know? Herb Brooks.
He was a very taciturn guy, no-nonsense guy, very serious guy. And when the game ended in Lake Placid, the game against the Soviets, he just wheeled and walked into the dressing room. He didn't wait for his team. He didn't celebrate with the assistant coaches. He just turned around and walked out of the building. Well, not out of the building, out of the rink. He walked into the dressing room. He was that very low-key guy, very quiet guy.
He wasn't too successful with the Rangers, though, when he coached them for a while.
No, he was not. Nobody is very successful with the Rangers. It's a bad situation. What can I tell you?
I'm a long sufferer. I thought of a question to ask you, Hal Bock. Do you working for the Rangers and your son being into hockey and what have you? Did you ever skate at the skating rink above the Garden, above
Iceland? Did I ever skate there? No, I can't skate. No, I can barely walk. No, I never skated. But the Rangers used to practice there, and I'll tell you a little funny story about that. They had a little cafeteria, and I was working for the team, and we took the writers upstairs to watch the practice. And we had a player on the Rangers that, at that time, a defenseman named Irv Spencer. He was called Spinner Spencer. And he was not a bad player, except he had one minor problem. He had trouble skating backwards. Now, if you're a defenseman, that's a real problem.
Right. Yeah, I would think.
Other than that, Mrs. Lincoln.
So here we are in a practice, and Spinner is on the ice, and he's going backwards, and he loses his balance, and he goes head over heels into the netting behind the goal, which was there to protect spectators from getting hit by pucks. And he got hung up in the netting, and he was hanging there. And I thought, well, how are we going to explain this, to the writers? And they had to take him down and help him out, But that was Irv Spencer, nice guy, but just couldn't skate backwards. And so that was the kind of team they had in those days. They had issues. Let's put it that way.
Where was this practice rink? I'm curious because I never knew about it.
On top of the Garden. It was on
really?
top of Madison Square Garden.
The old Madison Square Garden?
Yes, sir.
And they'd open it up to the public too, and lines were out there, and kids would skate around as if they were Rangers, and it was terrific as a kid.
It was a public rink, and it was atop Madison Square Garden, and the Rangers practiced there.
Gee, I wonder how I missed that one, because my friends and I used to ice skate all the time, either in Van Cortlandt Park when the lake was frozen and play hockey on the lake, or we'd go down to the Waldman rink in Central Park and skate there, or even Rockefeller Center, which has that wonderful rink down there.
I've skated there. I grew up in Queens, and Queens, out by where Shea Stadium is now, had a terrific skating rink. I don't remember the name of it, or my family didn't drive, so I don't remember exactly how to get there, but big skating rink out there. And we certainly had the weather for it with New York winters. That's for damn sure.
Yeah, right.
Oh, yeah.
And there was something about, you mentioned the ice skating rink in NBC? What?
Oh, on Rockefeller Center.
Rockefeller Center, yeah. There was something about that. Even for a Jew to skate around in the Christmas season, you could almost hear it.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah, it was a very festive location.
And Hal may remember this, but he probably didn't go since he doesn't skate. But Hal will remember that Carol Heiss was an NYU student in those days, an Olympic skater.
Are you kidding? Kidding? When she came back from the Winter Olympics, she won the gold medal.
Yeah.
In 1960. She
right.
came back to NYU, and we had a parade for her. She was the queen of the campus, and we celebrated her in great style. And she did a lovely woman, lovely girl.
Yes.
And
and she came out.
We was in love with her.
Everybody was. We had an NYU skating party there at the Rockefeller Center rink, and she came out and gave an exhibition, which was just wonderful. I mean, wow, it was just all part of that great, appreciation of her.
She was a very sweet woman, very sweet girl, and pretty talented too.
Yes, absolutely.
Gold medal. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Do you guys remember when they listed the Ranger lineup in the paper every day, and or every pregame they had, and they'd have the first line and the first defenseman, and everybody else was an alternate. Do you remember those lineups?
No.
Sure. Yeah, I remember them.
I wish they could. I wish now, looking back, we would have learned a little bit more if they would have had guys listed first line, second line, third line, so we could see what was on tap from that. But it did help us memorize all those guys, the Spencers, the Dave Ballones. No matter how insignificant a guy was, you'd be reading his name every time there was a game as a kid, and it's memory, like muscle memory.
Oh yeah, there's no question. There's a thing going on there's a thing going on Facebook these days. Your favorite athlete with each number, from number 1, number 2, number 3, and each number that they put up there, people are chiming in with current players and players of the last 10 years or so. The players I put up there are from the 60s and the 50s. I could give you the numbers of every Ranger player. Number 1 was Gump. Number 2 was Doug Harvey. Number 3 was Harry Howell. Number 4 was Al Langlois. Number 5 was Larry Cahan. And on I can go. I remember them like the hands of look at my hand, and I could tell you all of those names and numbers.
Now, here's an example of why they expanded too quickly. I remember Larry.
Well, you know what they did? They added 6 teams at once.
Yes,
and they put them in their own division. And what that meant was that they could have an expansion team in one of those 6 cities was going to finish in first place in its first year. I think it was the St. Louis Blues that wound up in first place. Maybe
I resented them because the Rangers with the blue shirts, as far as I was.
Right. And they were the Broadway Blues. The newspapers called them the Broadway Blues. Mm-hmm.
Right, and Berenson was the guy they got. He was the guy they got from the Rangers, if I'm not mistaken, and he turned out to be pretty good.
Didn't he score like 7 goals in one game or 6 goals in one game? I'm pretty sure.
I don't remember that, but
I'm pretty sure.
I want to just finish my point. Larry Cahan was not a star. He was not a good hockey player with the Rangers. And maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I'm looking in some encyclopedia of hockey or whatever, and it turns out that after he left the Rangers, he played another 14-some-odd years for this team, that team, or the other team, and in history, he's looked back on as a pretty solid, good, and NHL player. So
I'll tell you,
expansion, you get what you
we
get.
We had some really. First of all, they were terrific guys. I will forever treasure my relationship with Rod Gilbert, who was just the nicest, sweetest kid you could imagine. And he was my age, so it was fun to hang out with him. But they were just good guys. And when Emile Francis was the general manager and the coach, they came close a couple of times. In fact, I think we've had George Grimm on the program, and he wrote a book about We Did Everything But Win, about that team and about that roster. And one day
I invited him to the site, and he couldn't make it. Tonight, he's incredibly informative. Brings to mind how many great goalies, Jacquemin, Gump, Plant, that the Rangers had, and how poorly they did, despite being so strong in net.
Well, you got to have guys in front of you.
Yeah.
One time, I think I may have told this story. One time, Gump was asked, "What team gives you the most trouble?" And he looked up and he said, "The Rangers." So, he had a sense of humor. But
yes.
Emile decided he was going to finally going to break up this team. It's not going to win. We're going to break it up. And he traded Camille Henry. A little guy, number 21.
Penalty killer.
And he would stand in front of the net and he would just clean it up, and the fans loved him. And I loved him because he was a sweetheart of a guy. And Emile traded him, I think, to the Blackhawks, to Chicago. And after the first game that the team played after the trade, there was almost a fist fight in the press room between Emile Francis and one of the writers, because the writer kept asking him, why would you trade a fan favorite like Camille Henry? You got nothing back. Oh, we got plenty back. I don't think you got anything back, and so forth. And they nearly came to blows. I was there. I mean, it was an ugly place and an ugly time.
Do you remember the writer?
Sure. His name was Mel Woody, and he wrote for the Newark Evening News. The Newark Evening News is long gone. I don't know. I know Woody went to Cincinnati for a while. I don't know where he is now, if he's still around.
Well, he had some balls and some chutzpah, because talking to a general manager that had been around for like 15 years.
Mel Woody was a tough guy, I'll tell you. He was a big guy, and I think he had a farm. I think he was a farmer, in the off season. And
really?
he could handle himself. And Emile was a little guy. Emile was, a spindly little guy. So
yes.
I didn't think it was a fair match. But they didn't. We held Woody off, and calmer heads prevailed.
Yeah, Camille was a little guy too.
Yes, he was.
Yes,
he was.
Speak to Lou Fontanano.
Oh, great guy! Wow, what a defenseman.
Leapin' Lou. And what about Eddie?
If I remember
Eddie
correctly,
the Entertainer
he had a fight with Gordie Howe.
Had his ear cut off almost.
Yeah.
Gordie had like a scalpel. Used his stick like a scalpel.
And nobody wore helmets in those days, of course.
No.
That's true. What
Bernie
gets
Jeffrey
me is that they almost had to be
head off.
forced into wearing helmets. That grandfather the clauses, and this, that, and the other thing. How little they knew about head injuries, and how little we know today about head injuries. Now,
we know a lot more. We know a lot more now than we did then.
Yeah, for sure. But just recently, in the last week or so, a study was released that it isn't necessarily the concussions that cause long-term disability and brain changes. It's the little hits that
add up.
That add up, exactly. So, what do you tell what do you tell your kid if he wants to play football nowadays or hockey?
Go play flag football.
Yeah,
flag football. That's the solution, I think. But
and of course, the kids today
that eliminates the collisions.
Yeah, and the kids today all wear helmets.
That is your idea, and I concur with that idea. We get to see the skills, the passing skills, the ends, all of it, the running backs. But when I mentioned it on a talk show, on a podcast once or twice, people poo-pooed it. They said, "Oh no, the fans are not going to go for that because they still like the violence, like in
the hits." Right, sure.
Right, they don't mind
as long as they're not hitting you.
Yes, right. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. You don't get a helmet in your head.
I think I've said this before on the show. That's why there are 400,000 people at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because the race has always got multiple crashes. People love that stuff, love the violence, love the collisions. As long as they're not involved and they're not getting hurt or getting bloodied, it's great.
And I've seen that happen in the stands with NASCAR.
Yeah, it has.
It has. Films of that where these people sitting there waiting to see a crash, they get a bumper in their own head. That kind of thing.
Well, look at all these violent combat sports that have been very popular. Where you can hit, kick, and you're in a cage. I mean,
right. Those are right.
Appropriately,
there.
you're in a cage.
Yes.
I tell you what, the one thing I don't like about today's hockey game, and it's not the fault of hockey, it's the fault of TV. I used to love the fact that the lines would change on the run, that there were no timeouts, that you played the game, one line came on, one line came off, you shot the puck down the other end of the net of the ice, and you quickly changed sides. And now, in addition to timeouts, I mean, it's all regimented by the TV networks, just like in the NFL. It's taken something away from the rawness.
It was a skill to get at the right time.
Exactly.
The fan misses out on the little things. Like in every sport, it's like getting the base runner over. How much credence was paid in the old days? Nellie Fox or whoever you get, that was a good ball player. Same thing in hockey. The little things get going in the corners and what have you.
Right.
And if they take TV times out to change the lines, you're losing a piece of the game.
Absolutely.
And, all these changes are killing us on every level, basically.
To me, it's the equivalent to like saying, okay, well, you put a pinch runner on first base to run but we're going to bring the guy back later anyway.
Let me just tell you this one thing that came out today, and this has been going on in testing in the minor leagues for a year or two. In the All-Star game next year, if it's an extra inning game, they're going to start out each inning with a guy on second base.
Oh, I heard something about that.
Now, so when they were experimenting, like in the minors, doing this, that, and the other thing, that's going to come to fruition someday.
Sure.
Some form of it. It may not be exactly like that. Now, what does that do to the all-time record books? Runs scored. A guy scores from second base, and you win a ball game. Does he get a run scored? Does the batter get an RBI?
I would think so. But
probably.
How did he get to second base?
Will there be an asterisk? Years later, you're going to have to look up, well, he had 2,000 RBIs in his career, but he just missed that coveted $2,000 milestone because some of his RBIs, we're going to count them as half or some such shit.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
going to screw up the record books and the continuity of it all. That's
I've written this. If I've written it once, I've written it 1,000 times. Leave my game alone.
Right.
Best game ever invented. Leave it alone. But they insist on tinkering with it.
Well, they tinkered with the intentional base on balls, didn't they?
I was just going to say that.
And off you go.
And
kind of
just
stupid,
like
in my opinion.
It's a certain skill of getting that puck out and the puck handling, and they clap when a player would do that. There's a certain skill in walking a guy intentionally. A certain are they going to get the pitch over? That's been done where guys smack the ball.
That's right. And there have been wild pitches too.
And what happens after the intentional walk? It's a skill for the pitcher to be able to come back and now be able to intentionally get the ball over the plate.
Exactly.
So, how you say it best? Why mess with my game?
Leave my game alone.
No,
that's all.
Leave it alone, right? But they're going to have the clock for between pitchers. 30-second clock. Who knows what else?
Here's another thing. Major League Baseball had a seminar this week for its official scorers, and one of the main questions that was asked, now that most teams are using shifts, defensive shifts, the third baseman is playing over by where the second baseman ordinarily would play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, what if he makes a play at that position and throws a batter out?
It's a 5-3.
Scorecards, he's number 5. Number 3 is the first baseman. Number 4 is the second baseman. Number 5 is the third baseman. But if he makes the play at the right of second base, where a second baseman ordinarily would be, is he still number 5? Is he still 5-3? Does that tell you, when you look back a day later or a month later, where he was when he made that play? In the old days, when I was a youngster and growing up, 5-3 meant the ball was hit to third base, the third baseman threw it to first base. Now, 5-3 could mean almost anything. He could be stationed almost anywhere on the infield because of all of these defensive shifts. It's ridiculous. In my opinion, it's silly. But they didn't ask my opinion.
One of the podcasters on this station is a fellow by the name of Michael Duca. He's the official scorer for the Giants and the A's out here. And Michael Duca is at those meetings. And it's a big dilemma. It's also a big dilemma for the announcers to keep the flow of the game going with the shifts. To say nothing of the pauses for the commercial thing where this pitching change is brought to you by Amplitude, transmission. And there's
I still want left-handed hitters.
Stan Friedberg wrote a little parody years ago. It's come to true. Excuse me, Hal. Go ahead.
That's okay. I still want left-handed hitters who get up at the plate and see 4 guys on the right side of the infield to hit the ball to the left side where it'll go through for a base hit. It's a simple matter. It's bat control. And if you can't control the bat, you should be playing in single A, not in the major leagues, in my opinion. But I'm an old
hitting inside. It's what they call hitting inside out. And
Absolutely.
I don't think I've heard that expression in modern ball in a long time because
no, you haven't.
Bat skill.
Jeter was excellent at that. Jeter was great.
Absolutely. Major league players should be able to do that.
Yeah. How many hits did he hit? How many hits did he get go between first and second? I mean, he was tremendous at that. Just like you can remember, Rizzuto was a great bunter.
It's part of the strategy of the game
and
the skill set of the game. And it's gone by the boards.
Yep.
And, You mentioned Rizzuto was a great bunter, and I think I might have mentioned recently on one of these podcasters, Mickey Mantle was a great bunter.
Yeah, especially from the left side.
He'd have that drag bunt going.
Yeah.
And that added to his greatness as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, plus his terrific speed and that extra half step from the left side. It was tough to get him out.
Yep. But in today's day and age, would a batter give up the chance of hitting a home run to do that?
There you have it.
Well, Trey Turner on the Nats is very good. He's incredibly fast. And I've seen him bunt any number of times as the leadoff batter. So, and of course he's not a real power hitter anyway, but he's the leadoff batter, and the number one guy is supposed to get on base any way he can. So I've seen him do it any number of times, and I think
I wonder how much that will impress the arbitrator when it comes to salary time, as opposed to
I don't know. That's a good question.
Who is hitting 40, 50 home runs. Nothing wrong with that either. Every home run is very popular, but not at the cost of the game itself.
No.
The playing of the game.
Play the game.
Get them on, get them over, get them in.
Right.
I hear that.
That's right.
Recently, So, anything on either of your minds that you'd like to close the show with, gentlemen? David Hubler first.
There's something on my mind.
No, Hal Bock first. Go ahead, sir.
One of the things that offends me, one of the many things that offends me, is the National Hockey League All-Star Game arrangement now. They now apparently they play two semifinal games between the two of the four divisions. They split up the four divisions into semifinal games, and then they play a final game. Play a game, my God! Why is it so complicated?
I'm so glad you mentioned
that. It's an All-Star game.
I was going to ask you about that. I turned on the All-Star game the other day. Was it Sunday, I guess? And it was 10 minutes to go in the period. I said, I missed the half of the period. No, I didn't miss half the period. They were playing 10-minute periods. And I couldn't get what. It was crazy.
It's goofy. It's not hockey. If you're going to have a hockey All-Star game, how about we play hockey instead of this made-up, make-believe arrangement that they have? But they come up with these goofy ideas, and I don't know. I guess the people like it. I don't know. Not me.
I don't know. I don't know how well it was played.
What might have been a goofy idea was Peter Puck something you guys remember? Did it work? Were there anything good come out of that?
Only that NBC lost the contract for a few years.
I don't know what you're referring to. I guess I was out of country at the time. What was that?
Peter Puck was he was a mascot for NBC's broadcast of the National Hockey League.
Oh no, I never saw that. Oh.
Peter Puck.
Peter.
But they also followed the puck on screen.
Yeah, that was a Fox thing, I think.
Illuminated, right? They illuminated the puck, didn't they?
With a trail, like a comet. It had like a trail to it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's like a blue comet.
That didn't work too well either.
No. Well, the puck is so small, it is hard to follow.
On television.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's not a good television game.
No, but
it's a great game if you go to the
announcer,
arena.
like, what was his name? Gordon, I think, was the Ranger announcer.
Jim Gordon.
Jim Gordon, yes. He was terrific. That I can remember hockey on the radio in my mother's kitchen as if it were yesterday.
That's a tough sport to broadcast on the radio. I mean, you have to be really fast. I give those guys a lot of credit. It's one thing to do it on TV, but boy, and of course you don't know if it's right when you're listening to the game. But
we've got a TV guy here in New York who does the Ranger games named Sam Rosen, who really does a terrific job. I mean, I admire him a lot. I don't think he does any radio, but he does all the TV games, and he keeps up with them, and he does a great job.
Hey,
Yeah,
speaking of, you don't know if it's really what you're seeing when you hear it on the radio. Do you guys remember Les Kiter?
Sure.
When the Giants first moved? And
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Recreations of games. That,
Recreations, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right from the
I
studio.
think he did a great job. He did it off the newsreel, or not the newsreel, the ticker tape.
The Western Union ticker.
Of course, the late, great Ronald Reagan did the same thing, WGN.
That's right, absolutely.
Right.
That's how he started his career.
He should have ended it.
Oh.
He's looking better all the time, though.
Yeah, he is. He surely is.
So
we have to cut the show short. We got to go watch the State of the Union.
Yeah, another 15 minutes. Another 15 minutes.
Unfortunately, we know in advance the State of the Union.
Yeah, and it's not good.
Schmuck reading it to us on a teleprompter.
This is much better. This is much better and at a much higher intellectual level than what we're going to hear in 15 minutes. I'd rather talk about the NHL.
That's right. That's right.
All right, guys. Thank you. It's my pleasure with both of you.
Yeah, thanks, Hal, for reminding me, because I was going to ask you about that All-Star game setup. I didn't know what was going on.
Weird. Very weird.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Same time next week, everybody. Thank you for listening. I'd like to ask the audience if you enjoy our offerings to box up some lightly used children's books and bring them, if you would, to the Head Start program wherever you live. Kids need to read. They need to become school ready. They need to develop a passion, and they need to get their noses out of the devices with the games and use their imaginations a little bit by reading. I happen to be among talking to two authors so I'm sure they'll agree with me. It's a good idea to get kids reading, and they are our future.
Yes, sir.
Hal Bock, David Hubler, thank you. Comfortably Zoned Radio Network will be back next week. Thank you again, everybody.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.